Let me transition us to our final topic in a mini-series called A Theology of Hate. A Theology of Hate. Now, if you have not been to Trinity before, first of all, I'm really glad that you're here. It's a great place to explore your faith, wherever you're coming from in the spectrum of belief. But I also want to say this. Last week, I noticed when I said, we're talking about Theology of Hate, there was a guest who was like, do I need to leave? Like, what sort of a church is this and that? I want to talk to you about kind of where this comes from. So when we talk about a theology of hate, we're really talking about this broader idea in the Bible that when our hearts mirror the heart of Jesus, that it has multiple components to it. In fact, we're coming from Romans chapter 12. This is kind of the key off verse here. Let love be genuine. Let it be the real thing, not phony, not fake. Well, what does that mean? What does it mean for love to be genuine? To abhor what is evil and to hold fast to what is good. There's actually two things involved here. That I should have a response, a reaction to things that are evil, that are wrong, that are against the heart of Jesus. I should mirror that, and I need to have this thing where I'm actively holding on to what is good. Maybe to put it in another way, part of the calling of being a Christian is to love what Jesus loves and to hate what Jesus hates. So we've been asking this question, well, what exactly does Jesus hate? Now, there is, if we look at the book of Ecclesiastes for a moment, Ecclesiastes talks about this. You know the passage. You've got that song that goes, to everything turn, right? You know that song? It actually comes from the book of Ecclesiastes. There is a time for all these sorts of things, okay? There's a time to cast away stones, a time to gather stones together, a time to embrace, a time to refrain from embracing, a time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to keep and to cast away, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to silence, a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. When we live in this sort of broken world, and that we do, there is an appropriateness. There are times, there are instances where hate or the strong pushback, both internal and external against evil, is appropriate. So we've been asking this question, what would Jesus hate? We've looked at some different passages. We started with talking about Book of Revelation, the Nicolaitans. We've talked about those who are abusers of people, taking advantage of others. And I want to kind of end this little summer mini-series on this idea. One thing that Jesus hates, in fact, this is kind of a big umbrella concept here, is anything that keeps us from Him. Anything that keeps us from Him. So when I talk about this concept, what we're really talking about is discipleship. What does discipleship mean? What does it mean to follow Jesus? If you've been in church world for a while, discipleship is used kind of a bit of like a buzzword. It comes out at all different times. If you're not familiar with church, maybe it's a little bit of a strange word. But it's this idea that I am working on modeling my life, both inner and outer life, to match the life of Jesus. And if you think of it like a disciple, right? Somebody has a skill or a craft, and you're following after them to learn to do it like they do it. So in a very practical sense, when we talk about what is Christianity, it's following after Jesus, both internally, how we think, how we feel, what goes on in our hearts, our minds, and also externally. What do we do, the actions that we have, the words that we speak? How does this mirror Jesus? And Jesus actually gives us an answer to this. I'm going to be reading from Luke chapter 14 today. I invite you to turn there. I'll be reading from the ESV, but let me give you the context of what's happening in the book of Luke up till this point. So in Luke's telling of the gospel of Jesus, up until this time, Jesus has primarily been speaking with leaders, with people in the Pharisees, the Sanhedrin. He's been mostly interacting with leaders. Now, when you get to Luke 14, you've got this kind of shift shift in Jesus and what he's doing. Jesus suddenly starts turning and talking to the crowds, to the people that are following him. And by this time, a lot of people were following Jesus. Now, when people were following Jesus, part of it was because, well, they're just fascinated, okay? This, by the way, happened before Netflix and HBO Max, all this sort of stuff. Like, it wasn't that there was as many things going on, right? The world was much smaller. And so when this person comes to town and they're kind of controversial, I mean, there's people who are following just because they go, I'm kind of just interested to see what that person says, okay? That was some people following Jesus. Others were following Jesus because he did some miraculous things like healing somebody, casting out demons, creating food out of nothing. I mean, they were like, I can't believe the stuff I'm seeing. We've never even heard of anything like this. This is incredible. Some people are following because of the power. And there's some who are trying to understand and get at, who is this person as a religious leader? Like, what are they teaching about God? So you have all sorts of different people following Jesus for different reasons. Let me pause and just say, that's still true today. There's a number of people who are going, hey, I'm just kind of, I like the vibe of Jesus, you know? I like the golden rule stuff. I respect it, and maybe I'm just interested in a little bit of philosophy. There's other people who go, I like the idea of some sort of miraculous power or praying and receiving something from a divine source. Like, and I think Jesus can do that for me. So other people go, well, it's kind of a cultural thing. I mean, it's just a bit of my habit. I grew up in this. And there's people who go, I want to be like God, and I want to honor God. How do I do that? So all these people are following. And so Jesus turns to have a conversation. And he pivots to talk to the crowd and say, what does it mean to be a disciple? And I'm going to pick up in Luke 14, starting in verse 25. This is what it says. Now, great crowds accompanied him, and he turned to them and said, if anyone comes to me and does not hate father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even their own life, such a person cannot be my disciple. And whoever does not carry their cross and follow me cannot be my disciple. Now, this is kind of crazy. All these people are following Jesus. They're listening to some things that he says, and there's different people there for different reasons. And Jesus turns to them and said, if you do not hate your father and mother, you cannot be my disciple. Period. It's not even possible here. You go, oh, this is really kind of a strange thing. So let me just ask the question, does that sound like Jesus? Part of the reason I actually really love doing some of these little mini-series is to challenge a bit of our concepts here. Because, you know, when I grew up, I maybe had a little bit more shallower teaching, or maybe a little bit more children's ministry lesson, and you get the sort of flat version of Jesus, right? This is my bookmark from a couple weeks ago, right? The little thing that goes on a board, and you tell a story, and it's about somebody lowering down, an individual, and Jesus heals them and all this. When we limit our reading of Jesus, when we limit our discussions, our sermons of Jesus to just some of these more famous, well-knowns, we're actually going to miss something important. And because this really is kind of an odd thing to say, we kind of walk away scratching our heads and go, what? This doesn't sound like Jesus. So how do we think about this? Well, first of all, we just need to acknowledge kind of the elephant in the room. Jesus is trying to make a hyperbolic point here. He's not encouraging you to hate your parents because, you know, they were jerks or they didn't hug you enough or whatever it is. That's not actually the main goal of what he's saying. What he's saying has to do with discipleship. What he's saying has to do with an ordering of loves that does not exclude loving your parents, but actually it encapsulates it. So today, Jesus is going to give us two profound truths, and we have to understand this. And there's going to be one decision that we need to make, because Jesus is very definitive here. Let me look at the passage again. Large crowds were traveling with Jesus, and turning to them, he said, if anyone comes to me and does not hate father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even their own life, such a person cannot be my disciple. What does that even mean? Okay, well, let's talk about love. When we talk about love and hate, one thing is to challenge the Bible. In case maybe you weren't aware, was not written in English, actually. It's written in a few different languages, but predominantly the Old Testament is in Hebrew. The New Testament is in Koine Greek, the Greek at the time of Alexander the Great. And one of the things that Greek kind of does better than English is there's a little bit more nuance on some of this language here. So when we talk about love, for example, we kind of have one catch-all word, and that word is... Yeah, and the Beatles sang, that's all you need, so, right, just love, and we have it, it's just a very flexible word, okay? So we'll say stuff like, I love apple pie. That's not true, I actually don't like apple pie, but I love apple pie. I love my wife. Are those the same thing? Well, we kind of conceptually understand not. Greek actually breaks the word out into some very specific words for us. Here's what they look like. The first one is storge. This is kind of an appreciative love. This is where you say like, well, I love going to a concert and just hearing wonderful music. Okay, I have an appreciation for this. I love a certain type of food, or when I get to hike and I just see nature. That's kind of that most basic elementary of love. Then you have philia, which is where we get Philadelphia. Right, city of brotherly love. Philia is this sort of familial type love, right? I love, my brother, sister. I love my parents. Then we go to eros. So you get the word erotic. This is it's not strictly just sexual, but it is this sort of passionate love that you have that does exhibit itself more in the sexual context. And then you have this last one, agape. And agape is kind of the highest level. If you notice, they're kind of going from, well, I like a good cup of coffee. I really care about my friends and family. I'm passionate about the person that I'm married to. But there's this other type of love, agape, that's this sort of the most representative of the heart of God. It's the purest of these loves. It is loving simply for the sake of love. This is going to, by the way, change how you read sometimes in the Bible. When you read the story about Peter coming to Jesus, and Peter, after he just had this incredible fallout, denies Jesus 3 times. Jesus is resurrected, and there's that moment of confrontation. Right? And Peter's thinking, I failed this thing. I'm going to get a talking to, and he comes and kind of got his tail between his legs. He talks to Jesus, and Jesus says, Peter, do you love me? Peter says, yes, Lord. Peter, do you love me? Yes, Lord. Peter, do you love me? Now, when we read that, we just go, love, love, love. Is Jesus just kind of, is a bit of a broken record here? He's actually using different words. We just don't really have a great way to translate. Peter, do you agape me? Do you love me with this deep sort of God-like love? Peter, do you agape me? Peter, and this would be a better translation, do you even like me? It's kind of this deeper cut. It says, are we even just friends at this point, Peter? And that's why he breaks down and just goes, Lord, you know that I love you. And we've got this complex conversation about love. Well, when we come back to this passage for a moment, keep this in mind because this matters here. Let's talk about hate, though, before we leave the section. There's really one word that's used here for hate. Miseo is the word. You can see it here. This is kind of a very evocative word, a bit of a visceral word. It's this sort of, maybe a good English translation would be a sort of loathing. I mean, it is a level of distaste. It's not simply that I just don't like and don't approve. It's something that pulls at your gut and you go, I loathe this. That's the word that Jesus uses. Now, let's go back to our text. Large crowds were traveling with Jesus for all sorts of different reasons. And Jesus wants to push them to not have a relationship with him that's just about, well, how do I get more prayers answered in my life? Or, this thing went wrong and I really would like God's help in it going right. So Jesus, can you kind of help me here? Or I'm just curious if he's going to do another miracle. I'm just kind of interested, right? He's going to push people intentionally to drive away the people who are there for reasons other than learning about the one true God. So he's calling the herd here. So he's going to be provocative. The large crowds were traveling with Jesus, and turning to them, he said, if anyone comes to me and does not hate father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even their own life, such a person cannot be my disciple. Now, if you go back to the 10 Commandments, there's one of those commandments that's about honoring your father and your mother. Right? The Bible talks about this, honoring your father and mother. By the way, when you're an adult, just to be clear, that doesn't mean obeying everything that they say. It does mean honoring them, though. There's a distinction there, right? To always be honoring, even if, there's differences, disagreements. When you talk about honoring your father and your mother, this is one of the core things that's in the Bible. Is Jesus saying just jettison that? We know that can't be true. So how do we think about this? Jesus is being hyperbolic here, but he is making an important point. He's pushing people to see where they're going to stop following him and saying something that on the face of it sounds very controversial. But here's the first and most important truth. In fact, this truth will really revolutionize how you think about your own life if you've never encountered this before. We need to direct our love. When Jesus talks about, you can't be my disciple if you love something more than me. You cannot be my disciple if you love something more than me. And in fact, it should be such a strong commitment that if you're choosing between Jesus or father and mother or husband, wife, or children, and it's not so incredibly clear that you go, I am not losing hold of Jesus. This is my highest commitment. This is my highest priority. That it almost looks like you don't care. If it's not that extreme, then you cannot be my disciple. What do we mean by that? Well, the way that Jesus is framing this, and the way that actually the Bible's going to frame about how we think about love, we have this weird misconception in culture that love is this kind of open door, right? Love is all sorts of stuff. That was a Frozen reference, by the way. Like, this love is something that I don't pick, I don't choose. It just kind of happens. I love what I love, and I guess that's how I'm wired, right? The truth of it is that you love what you have learned to love. You can invest your love. You can direct your heart to learn to love. And in fact, more than you can, you in fact should. It's not a wise plan to be going through life going, I'm just going to wait till whatever naturally hits me, and that's what I'm going to do. The Bible says you actually need to be thoughtful in how you direct and invest your love. It is going a certain direction. It will be growing or shrinking depending on what you do, so you have to be thoughtful about this. And so this has been a part of Christian theology for a long time. And in fact, let me show you, this is Augustine. Writing a very long time ago. I want you to see what he talks about, what he says about this concept of how we have to both direct and order our loves in our life. This is a direct quote from his On Christian Doctrine. Now, he is a man of just and holy life who forms an unprejudiced estimate of things and keeps his affections also under strict control, so that he neither loves what he ought not to love, nor fails to love what he ought to love, nor loves that more which ought to be loved less, nor loves that equally which ought to be loved either less or more, nor loves that less or more which ought to be loved equally. Did you catch all that? Right? Augustine's a fun read. You should pick him up sometime. It's good stuff. Here's his point. You've got a whole big thing in life that's in front of you. There's all sorts of things that are going to demand pieces of your heart. They're going to demand pieces of your mind. And they're good things. They're good things. I care about what's happening in Rwanda. I care about, what's going on with my family, both immediate and extended. I care about what happens with this church. I cared about the U.S., men's soccer team until I don't anymore, I guess. I'm kind of done with that, right? There's all these sort of things in life. And the wise person, the godly person, is thoughtful about how those loves are ordered, how those loves are invested. If I don't order them correctly, all sorts of stuff gets mixed up. If all of a sudden, the biggest thing in my life is it's just all down to this, my career. That's actually the highest thing. And this sense of accomplishment, or that I'm meaningful or I'm worth some, whatever it is, right? And everything else falls underneath somehow, right? There's going to be problems. Did you know that actually the second highest rate of divorce in a marriage, do you know when it is? Empty nest, when the kids leave. And you found out that actually we just cared about the kid. And that's what we invested in. That was our highest thing. All of life was to launch this little person and see them be successful and live vicariously through them and wait for updates. And then all of a sudden they're gone, and I go, I don't even know you anymore. I don't even know if I like you anymore. Right? Did you fall out of love? No. You stopped investing and ordering it correctly. The wise person has to balance. There's a lot of pieces of my heart out there. How do I order it correctly? The first thing is you can direct it. This is not, a Disney movie where you're just kind of naturally doing this. You are in control of your love, and you need to be thoughtful about it. And truth number two, we need to order our loves correctly. We need to order them correctly. Now, this is where Jesus gets really specific, that there are some non-negotiables with how we order this. Matthew chapter 6, Jesus makes this statement. No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. Now, what's his point here? His point isn't some, anti-money rant. That's not the main idea. It's this deeper spiritual truth that you have to order your loves in a certain way for everything else to work, for it to work together and to work for your benefit and for God's glory. And that has to be, God is the ultimate authority. Let's just think of it in a practical term. We're not typically in a context where we've got servants and masters. Let's talk about work. If you're going to be one of those people, who run like multiple jobs, I'm going to have two very demanding jobs at the same time. I'm somehow going to think I'm going to be working 80 hours a week. Can you imagine how hard that would be, right? And there will come a time where there is conflict. If I say both of you are just equal in my life, there will be a time where you cannot do what you're being asked to do. It's going to break apart. There has to be this heartfelt decision, this clarity of thought. This is my ultimate, and everything else will fall under this. If you are imagining today that you can go, you know what? Jesus matters to me, but boy, all these other things do just as much, and I think that's going to work. I think that's going to be okay. The Bible says it's impossible. Not because of a lack of effort, or it's just our hearts cannot maintain that level of commitment to multiple things. You cannot serve both God and, honestly, we can make that a fill in the blank. You can put anything in there. You have to be clear. How do you order your loves? There can be no competition for your highest level of commitment. If you're going to be a follower of Jesus, there can be no competition at all. So, just to be very clear and very practical, if it's going to come down, I love my wife. She's in the service, so, I love my wife. I love my son. I have to have a commitment in my heart that the first and highest priority of my life is Jesus. And you know what? If I don't do that, Actually, the ordering of loves gets all mixed up, and love can become something that's a negative. It becomes something that's bad. So does this make us less loving? If we say, okay, Jesus, that sounds really tough. That sounds really tough. Does this make us less loving? Actually, what Jesus is going to argue is this makes you more of a loving person because you are loving correctly. You're loving appropriately. You know when the Bible talks about husband and wife and having God as the highest, sometimes it uses illustration with, newlyweds. You go, if your North Star is God and we're both moving towards Jesus, two people are doing this. You're actually coming closer together because things are in the right order. When someone's going, my highest commitment is following God. Well, what's the heart of God? The heart of God is to be a blessing. The heart of this, of all this is to love God, love your neighbor as yourself. By the way, do you know the ordering of that? God, others, self. There's an appropriate love for all three of those, but there is a right order, and there's a wrong one. Matthew 22. This is a very interesting passage here. When we talk about these levels of commitment, these types of love, and how do we order it, this is a conversation Jesus had with some other scholars, and the question comes up like this: Teacher, that's Jesus, which is the great commandment in the law? And he said to them, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. This is the great and first commandment. I'll pause right there. When you love God with all that you are, everything else will flow from there. That's why you could encapsulate all the law. You're going, well, wait a minute. Do you know how many laws there are in the Old Testament? Does anyone know? Genuine question, I don't know. There's a lot. There's a lot. There's actually hundreds of laws, right? If you're going into Deuteronomy, Leviticus, all this, there's a whole bunch of rules. That's a lot. And Jesus is actually going to argue, if you get the love piece right, if you order it right, if you invest it right, everything else is going to flow from there. Because you know what? I don't have to be told, you should care for the person who's next to you in need. I don't need to be told that if I have the heart of God in me. This God who loved the world so much that he sent his son, right? It's just going to happen naturally. That's why he says the first and greatest commandment is to order your love correctly. And a second commandment is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. If you wrap your head around this, if you wrap your heart around this, I love God, and from that, I love the people around me, and I have an appropriate love of self, right? Everything else will flow from that in your life. This doesn't actually make you less loving. It doesn't make me a worse husband for saying, sorry, Laura, I'm choosing Jesus over you. It actually makes me a better husband, actually, because the heart of Jesus and this heart of God, and it flows out in this place. Sometimes people imagine, right? The problem in my life is that I love things too much, Actually, our problem is that we love too little. That I love too much. It's kind of like one of those interview questions that's self-aggrandizing. What's a problem that you have? Well, I love too much, sometimes that's my problem. I just love the wrong things. I love too many things. I'm distracted. Actually, the Bible's going to argue that you don't love enough. But it's an order. Actually, if I love God with all of my heart, with all my mind, with all my soul, everything else is going to flow from this in my life. This is costly, and Jesus calls us to consider, then declare. This is hard. In fact, this is why Jesus says it to a group of large followers who are following for all sorts of different reasons. And the reason was not because Jesus was the highest commitment in their life. The reason was they heard he gave out free bread, and that's pretty awesome. And he wants to challenge this. He still challenges it today. Luke 14, verses 28 through 30. Let me read you just how he concludes this section. He says this, "For which of you, desiring to build a tower, does not first sit down and count the cost, whether he has enough to complete it? Otherwise, when he's laid a foundation and is not able to finish, all who see it will mock him, saying, 'This man began to build and was not able to finish.' Or, what king is going out to encounter another king in war will not sit down first and deliberate whether he is liable with 10,000 to meet him who comes against him with 20,000? And if not, while the other is yet a great way off, he sends delegation and asks for terms of peace. So therefore, any one of you who does not renounce all that he is cannot be my disciple." And here's the conclusion. Salt is good, but if salt has lost its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? It is of no use either for the soil or for the manure pile. It's thrown away. He who has ears, let him hear. What's Jesus saying? You need to have such a high commitment to me that it can almost look like hate, or it's a hyperbolic statement. He's not actually saying go out and hate your family. But it should be so clear and distinctive that people go, I know that person's highest commitment. It's clear. It's very, very clear. That's a disciple of Jesus. Anything less than that is not. And you have to think about this. You should really stop and consider this. I mean, you consider all sorts of stuff in life, right? Kings do it with war. People do it when they build a house, right? You're going to try to make a plan and a trip. You're going to stop and go, can we afford this? Do we have time for this? How's it going to be? What's our you think about stuff all the time in life. You need to do it with your relationship with Jesus. To stop and consider, is this really my heart? Is this my highest commitment? Can I do this? Am I going to declare, you know what? I'm following Jesus. Have you done that, friend? Have you done it in a while? At the very end, the conversation about salt. Salt is good. Salt is something we tend to avoid, here in the States. We get a lot of salt in our diet. Just to be clear, that was not the case in the ancient world. It was actually very difficult to come by salt, and you need it to live, right? So Roman soldiers, part of their pay would be salt, actually, because it helps the body and all this. Salt was a really important commodity, and people needed it. And he makes the point, salt is good, but if it loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? He's talking about these people who follow Jesus. What's the effectiveness of your spiritual life? And here's kind of the conclusion of that. Here's what he's saying. God uniquely uses people who decide that he's their highest commitment. Are you wanting to see God more at work in your life? Do you want to see prayers that are answered? Not by the way that you get a yes to everything that you prayed. That's not what I said. Did you see that God is answering prayers, that God is working and active in your life? Do you want to have a closer relationship with God? Then you must have this level of commitment. If you do not, it's like a salt that's lost its saltiness, its effectiveness, its usefulness in this life and in this world. If you want to live a life that's more than just about today, but makes a difference for eternity, friends, you have to have this type of commitment. Jesus says, those of you who do not give up everything you can't be my disciple. As the worship team comes up, as we conclude a theology of hate, one of the things that Jesus talks about is we have to learn to hate well, just like we have to learn to love well. That's going to look a couple different ways, but let me encapsulate it, summarize it by this. When we talk about this theology of hate and how I direct my heart, how I direct my life, the two truths, I can direct my love. It is a bad idea to go through this life and just kind of let whoever pull your heartstrings in different ways. And if you're doing this, by the way, and you're stopping and considering, and you find that actually my love, which by the way is more than warm, fuzzy feelings, it's my commitment to its good. Where's it wrapped up? And if it's something other than Jesus, I need to do some reordering. I need to make this sort of thoughtful decision, not, an emotional one. Jesus is not trying to, catch people in a moment. He's saying, you got to sit down and consider, like someone going to war. Think it through. What is my highest commitment today? Can I honestly say it's Jesus? And if we can, all of a sudden everything starts flowing from there. Direct and order your love, consider and commit. Now, I was tempted at this point to make an altar call. I'm not going to. But I want you to seriously stop and think, do I have to recommit this thing in my life? God, you are my highest priority, my love. Would everything else flow from there? And friends, I believe that if you get that right, you're going to see God at work in your life in new and fresh ways. I believe you're going to see God changing the lives of those who are around you, making a difference, not just for this life, but for the life to come. Because you'll be a true disciple of Jesus. Father in heaven, today, teach us to love what you love. Teach us to hate what you hate. And Father, may we have a strong reaction, a fear of losing our love for you, a fear of putting things higher than you, this sort of loathing concern that we would ever wander so far, that God, we would lose what you've made us to be, followers of you, children who look and sound and act like their Father. I pray, teach us to commit and recommit our lives for you. Teach us to decide to follow you today. For we ask it in the name of God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit. And all God's people said, amen.